Plus, reading reactions. What weren't they saying in last night's leaders' debate? Welcome back. Now, we know their policies, we know their promises, and we think we know them. But do we really? John Key and Phil Goff squared off in the last TV debate last night before the election on Saturday. Asset sales, Winston, and a whole heap besides were chewed over between the two. But we got body language expert Suzanne Masefield in to read the men who would be PM. Her answers may surprise you.
What's happening with both of them is they've actually got their hands linked in front of each other, which is called barriering. So they're actually trying to settle themselves down, but also it's like a protective mechanism. John Key's got his thumbs on the top, which is actually a baseline movement for him. It's something he does quite a bit. And that's about superiority or trying to keep in charge of himself. Well, Phil Goff is actually challenging John Key, and he's coming into a space with both his hands. Both hands out like this are very much about, they're a leadership position, and by opening your fingers, you're actually trying to encompass everybody and draw everybody in to your argument or point of view. John Key, on the other hand, has actually, got his head down. He doesn't want to engage in the argument. He's got his hands quite firmly clasped, so he's protecting himself. And really, he doesn't want to engage in this argument, whereas Phil Goff is finds it much easier to relate to your everyday people, whereas John Key is very much about facts, figures, let's get on with it, let's make a difference, let's be practical. And he looks on a bigger perspective from a strategy point of view, and his whole body language projects that. It's very contained, it's very much about leadership, it's boxed like strategy.
He kept using his name as well. He kept saying John, John, John.
John can't live on $13 an hour. John, I've read the same Treasury paper. It's time to give them a fair go, John.
I don't think all the way through the first one and not much in the second one did John Key say Phil Goff's name.
Well, he doesn't want to engage with him. I mean, he just wants to get the facts out.
There, the open hand, is that like a pleading kind of thing? It almost looks like he's desperately trying to get his point across. What's that?
Well, if you noticed earlier, we talked about that with Phil Goff, and actually this is quite a strong leadership position with hands. When they open the fingers, it's to draw everybody in. So John Key very much has his thumbs up, which is very much about I'm in charge, it's a superior thing.
This is the back of both leaders, and to the sort of untrained eye, not much in it, but you think there's a bit more than just sitting there.
It's very, very tight across both of their shoulders, which what that suggests is that they've both pulled their shoulders in slightly, which again is a protective mechanism to pull their energy in when they're actually presenting. So there's a lot of tension around the shoulders.
What is Labour's position on working with Winston Peters?
Interesting, just talking about the Winston Peters bit with with Phil Goff there. What happens when Phil Goff mentions Winston Peters is he immediately blinks his eyes a couple of times, goes into a frown and flares his nostrils, which is very interesting as a combo of body language gestures. When somebody starts blinking a lot, it's because they don't actually want to see what's in front of them. They want to be heard and their point of view to be put across. So it's very much about, I don't want to have this person in my view, and he was talking about Winston Peters.
The power companies enable us to have control over our energy supply for the future.
He's fed up, he looks very tired with the whole thing, he's shaking his head, here we go again. He did do some blinking, in other words, he wants to actually remove Phil Goff from his vision, and some pacifying body language around the mouth. He pouts his lips and actually puts some air underneath the lips again. So angry, frustrated with the whole thing. When Phil Goff was talking about the poverty level with children in this country and diseases that are preventable, John Key was actually sitting there with his head down and he was scratching his right hand. Now, the right hand is the masculine, it's about the doer. And when you're scratching something, it's about you're irritated. So he actually does want to do something about that. That is what his body language is showing, what's going on inside. But because he's quite contained, it's quite a minimal movement.
Would you like to wish each other well fulfilled?
On the surface of it, it looks like two schoolboys after a rugby match shaking hands. They're smiling, they're laughing. However, if you slow it down to actually see what really happens, you have Phil Goff actually moves right the way back and comes in with his arm over the top. He grabs John Key's hand to take a handshake, but he puts his hand over the top, which is a dominant handshake. John Key tries to readdress that by putting his thumb over the top of Phil Goff. And so there's almost like a little bit of an arm wrestling match going on, all very subtly, and John Key has his left hand in a fist on the desk. Left side is emotional, and a fist is about anger. So he's containing his anger yet again. And the smile from Phil Goff, it's an over-exaggerated smile, so it's called, that's a hidden intentional. In other words, it's basically doing the opposite of what he feels. And if you hide the mouth and look at the eyes, it actually looks like, I've got you. Yeah. And the mouth is very open and baring the teeth. And if you think about what happens in the animal kingdom when you bare the teeth, it's not about, I like you.
Really interesting. I'm going to sit all afternoon sitting on my hands and not blinking, not giving anything away.